Hello guys, I hope you are doing good. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to solve a machine coding interview question which was asked in Atlassian's principal engineer interview. This was posted on lead code, and I guess this is a fairly new interview question. It was posted on May 22, 25, which is I guess 3 months prior to the date of when I'm recording this video. As you can see, the user who has posted this has to go through multiple round of interviews. He has mentioned three primary round. One was UI coding, so build a tab component with some variations like lazy loading content when the tab panel is visible. We are going to solve this. The second question was he has to create a function to measure the performance of given functions. I have also solved this, and this is added as a question set. And the third was designing the Google editor or Google Docs. So he was asked to focus on conflict resolution algorithms like OT and CRDT. So all three questions are solved and it is shared on my platform. As you can see, if you are preparing for your front-end interviews and looking for resources, you can check out my course alpha.learnsbucket.com. So here I have explained the CRDT and OT, how it works with the JavaScript code so that you can implement it if asked. Coming back to the question, so we are going to solve this machine coding question by creating this tab component with the lazy loading of the content when the panel is visible. If I see the job description on the Atlassian site, a principal engineer role or a principal front-end software engineer role requires at least 10 years of experience. So which goes around a senior staff level compared to the other organizations in the market. So the problem statement may look simple to you that we have to create a tab component with lazy loading, but while writing the code, you will have to be extra careful because you are engineering for if you are interviewing for a senior role. So you have to make sure that all the best practices are followed while creating this. We'll try to do the same over here. There are multiple ways through which we can create a tab component. Let me explain you. So let me clear this first, everything from here, and let's wrap this review. So see, the first or the initial thinking that we have while creating a tab component is we create a tab provider, and then we have the tab list. Inside the tab list, we'll have our tabs. Let's say tab, and then tab 1, tab 2, and we'll have IDs for this. Tab 1, tab 2, and then we'll have tab panels. And inside this, we'll have our two tab panels. And here we'll say tab ID is ID1. So this will correspond to the tab with the ID tab 1, and this will correspond to the tab with the ID tab 2. And then we call this as tab panel. So this is the ideal structure that comes to our mind when we have to create a tab component. This is a good way to create a tab, I would say, because things are in control and that is wrapped within the provider. So you don't have to explicitly maintain the state outside. The tab provider will help you to centralize the state, and it will then you can access that within the components and manually update it as per your requirements within this. The only problem with this is this makes the tab and the tab panel to be too tightly coupled. They have to be within the tab provider in order to function properly. Now there are use cases where we don't want them to be tightly coupled. We want them to be flexible so that the tabs can be placed anywhere on the UI independently and the tab panel can be placed anywhere in the UI independently. So it is up to us how do we want to design this. I prefer the flexibility so that let's say there is a requirement in the future where we want the tab panel to be flexible, and we want to trigger them from multiple places or update them. So I want to have that flexibility with me. For that, what I'm going to do is, rather than using the tab provider or the provider design pattern, I'm going to use the headless design pattern. So what headless design pattern does is, it encapsulates the state and logic separately, and it gives the control to the UI element or the child element to render the UI however they wish. So our tab, its state and logic will be completely separate, and then we'll have the UI separate. So if you are looking for learning the advanced React component patterns, that too are present on my course. I have each one of them explained over here. So if you are preparing for interviews, this is a good resource that you can prepare from. Coming back to the question, so let's see how we can create the tab using the headless pattern over here. Let me create a new file. So in the source, I'll create a new file, tab.jsx, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the store or a hook which will control the tab separately, and then the tab components here itself, and we'll follow the best practices. So first let's create the store. So the tab store will be the centralized manager or the store manager, state manager, whatever we call this, to maintain the state. So here I'll have active tab and then set active tab, and we'll have the state as null. And then we are going to return this active tab and set active tab from here. And now we are going to access this within our components to update the state however we want in the store, and to listen to its changes and then accordingly do the UI updates. So this, I'm just keeping it extremely simple over here because we have to implement this during the interview. So keeping it as simple, as small as possible will be really helpful to solve the problem in the given amount of time. Now after this, let's create the tab component. So a tab will accept an ID and label that will be rendered. Then we'll accept the store as an input altogether. Whatever we are returning from here, we'll accept it, and then we are going to accept the default active. So it's good that we accept the default actives on the tab itself rather than assuming that the first tab will always be active, because this store is completely unaware of the way the UI will act. That's why here we are initializing it with the null state. We don't want it to be coupled with the tab. We are accepting the default active ID within the tab element, and then what we are going to do is we are going to update it. So first let's get the active tab and then set active tab from the store, and then here we'll have the use effect hook. So on the mount of this component, what I'll do is I'll check if default active is there, then I have to set the active tab as default active, and then after this what I'll do is I'll return the JSX from here. So I'll use a button because the tabs has to be clicked, so a button element is what suits the best over here, and this button will render with the label that we accept. It will have a role that will make it accessible and define that this button will act as a tab, and then will have its class name. So when the ID of this tab equals to the active tab, then we want to have an extra class active. So let's have this class name, and let me remove it from here, and let's say if it is matching, then we'll pass the active tab, otherwise we'll pass empty strings, and then this class name will be assigned to here. And after this I'll have the on click event, and what it will do is on the click of this we'll set the active tab as the tab with the ID. So this ID will be passed and we'll set it as active tab. Now we have defined the role. This says that you are an experienced engineer and you know how things work on the front end. So these small things matter in interviews, especially when you are appearing for the senior roles. And then we got the class name and on the click of this. So we have created our tab component over here, and now let's go and create the tab panel component itself here. So const tab panel, and the tab panel 2 will accept the tab ID, the store, and then the children it will render. And here we'll get the active tab from the store. So in the tab panel we don't want to do any state manipulation like changing the active tabs value as per the current logic. That's why I'm only pulling the active tab. But let's say if a need arises for you, then you can pull the set active tab and do the mutations as you want. And then here the first check that I'll do is if active tab is not equals to the current tab ID, then I have to return null. Now what this will do is when we are returning null, this will remove this tree from the DOM hierarchy because we are returning null based on this condition. Now there are often cases where you want to remove the child element altogether when the tab panel is hidden, and then there are some cases where you want to have the tab panel's children but you want it to be invisible. So depending upon the case, let's say if you want to completely remove the children from the DOM hierarchy, I would suggest that you accept an extra parameter, so unmount on hide, and then based on this you remove the children altogether from the DOM hierarchy. Otherwise what you will do is we'll just hide the element. So const hidden will just check if this is false, unmount on hide, and our active tab is not equals to tab ID, then what we have to do is we have to pass the hidden props. So if it is hidden, then we'll pass hidden as true, otherwise we'll pass empty object. And then finally I'm going to return a div that will have the children, it will render it, and then I'll set the area role as tab panel. This will say that this is a tab panel, so this element is acting as a tab panel, and then I'll pass my hidden props to it. Hidden props. Now we don't have to use a class to hide this element. HTML provides or comes with a hidden prop in the modern browsers that hides the HTML where we have set the hidden as true. So that's why here I'm checking if we have to hide this element, then I'm setting this hidden props, and this will be passed to the tab panel. Now that we have defined our tab panel, our tab, and then our use tab store, let's export them from here. So export use tab store, tab, and tab panel, all these three, and then let's import it and then test it in our app. So because we are using the headless pattern over here, let me remove the provider. So first let's import use tab store, tab, and tab panel from tabs.jsx, and then here I'll say font store equals to use tab store, which will return me the object. And now I'll remove this tab provider, tab panels, and then I have tab ID and tab panel with me now. Now I can place this anywhere I want. So just for the UI, let's do the grouping. So I have my tabs separated and the tab panel, and both of these will accept the store as input. So here, let me remove this altogether. If you want, you can pass it as a children, but because I have defined my tab to accept the labels, so label will be tab 1, and then the label will be tab 2, and then here we'll pass our store, and then along with this I'll set this one as default active, but it's up to you. How do you want to set it as default active, this or that? Let me remove this as well. Now if you set the second one, or if you add the default active to both one, the second one will be active because that's the last component to be mounted in the hierarchy. So based on the hierarchy, the last one will be set as the default active. Now I've set the first one as default active. We'll test like if we set the second one, it's setting as default active or not. So we got our tab. Now here let's pass the store, and then we have our content. Now let's see if it renders or not. So here disconnected, use effect is not defined in the tabs. Let's pull this, use effect, save this over here, and if I reload, you see we got tab 1 and tab 2 rendered. Invalid area prop. Okay, we'll have to see how we have to set this. The area role on the React component, I guess it will be like this, if I'm not wrong, depending upon the conventions, but we'll have to see. No, so this is not how it is. check again. It is saying invalid area prop on button. Okay, we'll come back and we'll see this, but let me clear this. Now I got my tab 1 and tab 2. Here I've set the default active, but by default it was not active. If I reload this, the tab 1 should be visible. So let's see what's happening. Coming back to the tab, if default active is there, then I have to set the current ID as default active. I was passing default active over here, that's why it was not updating, but I have to set the current ID as default active. Now it is working fine. And if I change this, so tab 1 and tab 2 are working properly. Going back to the app.js, let's say if I remove the default active from the first tab, and if I go and set it on the second tab, I save this, I reload this, then by default tab 2 is active. So it is working properly. Let it be here only. Now in the problem statement, it was mentioned that we have to lazy load the component when tab panel is visible. So we don't have to load the component upfront, we have to lazy load it when the tab component is the tab panel is visible. So based on that, let me create a test file, test.jsx, and here we'll create a component. So export default test, and then we'll say return h1. Test component from here. It's not syntax highlighting. Export test, function test, and then here I have to export default. And now I'll create a helper function over here that will delay the loading of any element. So let's say function delay for demo, and then it will accept a promise, and what it will do is it will return a new promise that will resolve after the specified duration. So let's say set timeout resolve after 3 seconds, and then finally after this what we'll do is we'll resolve or return the promise. So this will just delay whatever we are importing. This will help us to test if our component is working properly or not. So these all things we have to create in the interviews when we are appearing for the senior roles. That's why I have created it too. Now here let's just go and import the test component, and here I'll say lazy. So let me import the lazy loader from the React lazy, and the suspense. So suspense is the fallback handler when the component is being loaded. So lazy, I am going to lazy load with the delay for demo, and then I'm going to import our test.jsx. And now I'm going to wrap this here within the suspense. So suspense, and then I'll load my component, and in the suspense I'll set a fallback by the time these components load. So In the fallback, I'll set div and loading. So now if I reload this, you'll see that the component is being loaded for 3 seconds and then it is being shown. So it's lazy loading the component when the tab panel is visible, because we have set the default active to the second tab. So it is starting to load it instantly on mount. If I set it on the first tab and then when I click on the tab 2, it should start loading it then. So if I reload this and now if I go to tab 2, it should start loading it. So it's loading. Now it is loaded. If I reload this again and if I go to tab 2, so it will load on the initial mount and then the component should be visible. After it is visible, then there is no need of lazy loading because it is already cached, so it won't happen. So this is how we create the tab component with lazy loading the panel. Now one more thing we have to do is we have to highlight which tab is active. So for that I'm going to app.css. I'm going to clear this. So let's keep the app part and clear the remaining so that it is centralized. And here I'll set active and background color as green, so the active tab is highlighted. So if I go to tab 1, it is green. If I go to tab 2, it is green. Now you can design the tab components however you want. So on the test.js, the final piece pending, I guess, is testing the unmount on hide. So if the component is being removed or not, this property. So here, let me get use effect. So import use effect from React, and then in the test function I'll use effect, and that will render and will console log something when the component is about to unmount, just to test that if the unmounting is happening properly or not. So console.log unmounting test. And if I save this, if I go back to main.js, it is running in strict mode, which means that this will be rendered twice. So in the strict mode, use effect hooks fast twice. So remember that. And now if I come back here, if I reload this, if I go to tab 2, come back to tab 1, nothing is happening because the unmounting is not taking place. The component is only hidden and then it is shown again. And if I pass the prop as unmount on hide, that's what we have, right? Unmount on hide over here, and save this. And let me clear this, reload, and now if I go to tab 2, the component is being loaded. It is loaded. If I come to tab 1, so it should print unmounting test. So it is being printed. Because it fast twice, so that's why it's loading on the tab 2 as well. Let me see if I can remove the strict mode, then how it works. It should work fine then. Let me clear this, drag it a little bit up. If I go to tab 2, so it is being loaded. I come back to tab 1, so it's unmounting. So it is only fired once when we move from tab 2 to tab 1. If I go back again to tab 1, it is fired again. If I move back to tab 2 and come back to tab 1 again, it is fired again. So it is working properly. So this is how you can create the tab component following the headless pattern in React and while lazy loading the tab panel's children. I hope you have learned something new today. Thank you for your time.